Hi everyone, so this is the final paper in the B2, C2, P2 higher collection, if you like, past paper 6. So here's the equations at the front of the paper. Please make sure you use them, especially in the physics section. And the first section is biology. So this question is about classification. Biologists use visible features to classify animals. Look at the pictures of two crabs. The crabs in the picture are able to breathe each other and produce fertile offspring. What is the smallest group the two crabs could be classified into? Put a tick in the box next to correct answer, and that's a species, so species needs a tick. Crabs belong to a class of arthropods. Biologists often find it difficult to place organisms in definite groups just on visible features that explain why. So this is the idea that says in the mark scheme, variety of life is a continuous spectrum. So you could allow that different living things look very similar or have similar characteristics, or they have features that could fit into more than one group, or they can't see the genetic code. You could say they can't see if they produce fertile offspring, or you could say that animals look different but still belong to the same group due to common ancestors. So any one of those different points get that mark there. Biologists have used two types of classification system. One is called natural and the other is called artificial. Explain the difference between the two systems. So natural systems are based on evolutionary relationships or common characteristics, and artificial systems are based on a few or limited number of characteristics. This next question is about pollution. Look at the picture. It shows the loss of ozone from the Earth's atmosphere. Write about the reasons why ozone is being lost from the atmosphere. So CFCs get you the first mark, and they're from aerosols or refrigeration or fridges for the second mark. If you've put anything about global warming or greenhouse gases, then you lose the marks. People live in Africa, South America and Australia. Parts of each of these continents are affected by the loss of ozone. People in one of these three continents will be most affected by the loss of ozone. Use the diagram to decide which continent this is and explain how the people will be affected. So, first mark saying South America, and the second mark saying that they'll be exposed to more UV radiation or they might have more risk of skin cancer. The reason why you choose South America is because the diagram shows that the bottom part, there you are, South America there's ozone loss, but Australia actually isn't part of that, neither is Africa really. South America is the main part there. The next question is the 6-mark question, so please use the mark scheme on the Google site in order to mark that yourself, and then ask your teacher if you're unsure whether you've marked it correctly. Next on to a food web, there it is. This is one of the food chains from the food web. A pyramid of biomass can be drawn to describe this food chain. Finish the pyramid of biomass to include the small fish and the cormorants. Make sure the bars are drawn to scale and labelled, and phytoplankton has been done for you. So you've got to do small fish and the cormorants. So that's these two here. So you can see that small fish is a tenth of the phytoplankton. So phytoplankton has a bar that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 across. So a tenth of 16 is 1.6. So if we think about numbers of small squares, there are 80. So we need to do 8 squares across. So if I just zoom in, actually, that would be easier for me to do this accurately. So you've got start there. Doesn't really matter where you start, to be honest. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then a cormorant is just going to be one of those, like that. So it asks you to label them, but you can just label them next to it. So small fish and cormorant. There you are, so 2 marks there, 1 for each one. Here's another food chain in this food web. Biologists would have great difficulty in collecting the data for the pyramid of biomass for this food chain. Explain why. So First mark is saying that humans are involved in other food chains on more than one trophic level. And you could say that taking dry mass of humans or whales would be very difficult, because you can't dry out a human. The bald eagle is an endangered bird in the USA. It has had legal protection since 1940. From 1963 until 2006, surveys of bald eagle breeding pairs were done. In 2007, the bald eagle was removed from the USA list of endangered species. Look at the graph. There it is. Use evidence in the graph to suggest why the bald eagle is at risk of extinction and why it has now been removed from the endangered list. So you could say one mark saying that numbers were very low. That's why they were at risk of extinction. You could say that protection has allowed numbers to recover, and then the third mark saying that numbers are now high enough so they're no longer endangered. So numbers were very low here for first mark. They were protected, so numbers were able to recover, and now we've got quite a lot of them. Numbers are now high enough so they are no longer classified as endangered. Penguins can live in very cold conditions. Penguin eggs will not freeze until the temperature is well below naught. Suggest what prevents the eggs from freezing. So that it contains antifreeze protein or an antifreeze chemical. So that's the only mark you can get there. Look at the diagram showing blood flow in the legs of 3 different birds. Which diagram shows the best blood flow for a penguin? So that is leg B. And then the reason is that the blood vessels are very close together. So there's two marks here. So the first mark saying leg B, and then the next 2 marks for the explanation. So any 2 of these, the blood vessels are close together. There's more heat transfer between the vessels. You could say that the blood vessels are further away from the leg surface, so there's less heat can be lost. Or you could say there's a counter current. You could also say there's a counter current for leg A or C. So if you said leg A or C, you wouldn't get a mark there. But if you said counter current in your reason, you will get some credit for that. So, chemistry section. Many different materials needs to build a car. Suggest a property of glass that makes useful building a car windscreen. So, saying it's see-through or transparent will get you a mark here. But there's also other marks you get. You could say it doesn't dissolve or it's waterproof. You could say it doesn't rot or biodegrade. But you can't say it's shatterproof or strong because they do shatter if you crash. Some car bodies are now built from aluminium instead of steel. One advantage of using aluminium is that it's less dense than steel. Write down one other advantage of building car bodies from aluminium instead of steel. So it's the idea that aluminium will corrode less, or it doesn't corrode at all, in fact. You could say the car will have better fuel economy. That would also be fine. Look at the table. It shows information about some of the materials used to build a car. Explain why PVC is used for covering the electrical wires in a car. So 2 marks here. One for saying that it's highly flexible, and the second for saying that it's has low conductivity, or it's an insulator. This question about fertilizers. Ammonium sulfate is used as a fertilizer. Complete the table to show the number of atoms of each element in the formula for ammonium sulfate. So there you've got nitrogen, which is the N. Now, because the N's inside the brackets, of which there are 2 of, there's actually 2 N's in this. There are 8 hydrogens, because there's 4 inside the brackets, but there's 2 lots of everything inside the brackets. There's 1 sulfur, and there's 4 oxygens, the sulfur and the oxygen being outside the brackets, and therefore are just based on their straight numbers that are written there. Ammonium sulfate is made by reacting an acid with an alkali. Name the acid and alkali needed and describe how they're used to make a sample of ammonium sulfate. So the acid and alkali that are needed are ammonia, or you could say ammonium hydroxide if you wanted to, but you can't just say ammonium, that wouldn't get you the mark. And then sulfuric acid. So if you could put those 2 things down, that's 2 marks already. And then any one of saying that you mix them until they're neutralised, and then you have to evaporate off the water for a mark, you could say as well. So you get a mark for each of these, and then a mark for a little bit about the process. So the idea the acid is added to the alkali using an indicator or until it's neutralised, and then you have to evaporate off the water. This next question is a 6-mark question, so please mark this yourself off the Google site, and then ask your teacher to check it for you if you're unsure. This question is about the structure of the Earth. It is difficult for scientists to study the structure of the Earth. Explain why. And that's because the crust is too thick to drill through, or you could say the mantle is too hot, or the core is too hot, or we aren't able to dig deep enough. Any one of those will get that mark. The Earth's crust is made up of tectonic plates that move slowly. The theory of plate tectonics developed over many years. Write about 2 stages in the development of the theory of plate tectonics. So, first, you could say that, so any of 2 of these, you could say that continental drift theory was suggested. You could say that continental drift theory was not accepted by scientists at the time, but extra evidence obtained, such as seafloor spreading, then backed up the theory. So any 2 of those 3 would be fine. Why do most scientists now accept this developed theory? And that's because the research that has now been done supports the theory, or there's more evidence to support it, or we could say that there's you could say any example of extra evidence, so there's similar fossils in South America and Africa, or that the continents look like they fit together like a jigsaw, so any of those. This question is about metals. Phil wants to buy a new bike. He uses the internet to research which metal is most suitable for making the bike frame. Look at the table. Which metal is most suitable for making Phil's bike frame, and use information to explain. So you don't get a mark for suggesting the metal, but you get a mark for saying the reason. So you could actually say any of them, as long as you put some reasons, but actually some of them are worth less than others. So if you could put copper, you could only say that it's because it doesn't rust, or it has a good resistance to corrosion. If you said aluminium, you could say that, so that only get you 1 mark for copper. Aluminium, you could say it has a good resistance to corrosion and it has a low density, for 2 marks. If you said stainless steel, you could say it has a good resistance to corrosion, it's strong and it's the cheapest, for 3 marks. Or titanium, because it has good resistance to corrosion, it's strong and it's lightweight, or it has a low density, for 3 marks. So, depending on which one you chose, would limit the number of marks you could get. So the next question, it says pure copper is used for electrical wiring. The copper is purified by electrolysis. The diagram shows the apparatus used to purify copper. Complete the labels on the diagram. Choose your answers from the list. There's a number of different labels there. So the liquid is copper sulfate. So that one needs to go here. Then the anode is made of impure copper. So you need this label, impure copper anode. And the anode is the positive one. That's there. Now, the diagram actually kind of shows you which one is the impure copper, because it's the thicker one, because you're going to have copper going from the thicker one to the thinner one. And then you've got a pure copper cathode, which is this one here. Pretty tricky, that one, actually. During electrolysis of sodium bromide solution, bromide ions make bromine molecules. Complete the equation with 3 actions. So you've got 2 bromines here, so you need a 2 in front of there, and then each one of these bromines is going to lose an electron, so you need 2 in front of electrons as well. Explain why this reaction is an example of oxidation. Remember, oil rig, so oxidation is loss of electrons, reduction is gain. Because of this minus here, you're taking away the electrons, so it shows the bromide is losing electrons. So that's what you need to say. You could say it's oxidation because the electrons are lost from the Br minus. Now on to physics. It says nuclear power stations have benefits and risks. Devinder is worried because he lives near a nuclear power station. Write about 1 risk of living near a nuclear power station and explain how this risk is reduced for people living nearby. So there's lots of different things you could say here. So first, 1 mark for the risk. You say there's a radiation leak, or leak of nuclear material, or leak of nuclear waste. You could say that the power station may get damaged, or it might get attacked by a terrorist, or it might be an earthquake. Or we could say radiation sickness or poisoning. And then 1 mark saying how the risk is reduced. So any one of these could say you could monitor people, you could monitor the radiation level, you could say safe storage of disposal of nuclear materials, better control of the reactor, better shielding against radiation loss, have a good shutdown or emergency procedure, extra protection for earthquake risk areas, or better security at nuclear power stations. So any of those will get you that 1 mark for saying how the risk could be reduced. The nuclear power station produces electricity. The electrical output of the power station is connected to transformers. The outputs of these transformers are connected to the national grid. Why are these transformers used, and how is this important for the national grid? So there's 3 marks here. If you just said that it changes the voltage, that would only get you 1 mark. But if you say if you said the voltage increases or it steps up the voltage, that would get you 2 marks. And then the third mark is saying why we do it. That's because it reduces energy loss or it reduces the cost. So you could get 2 marks if you just say it changes the voltage, but you've got to say that it increases the voltage to get you the third mark if you're also saying it reduces energy loss or reduces the cost. Comets orbit the Sun and are made of dust and ice. Some comets take hundreds of years to complete one orbit. Look at the picture. We can only see a comet for a very small part of its orbit. In which part of its orbit can the comet be seen, and explain why? So this is when the comet is near the Sun or the Earth, and that's because it is illuminated by the Sun, or it has a trail or a tail or reflects light. So it doesn't make its own light, it has to reflect light from a star, which is in this case the Sun. If you say when the orbit's near the Earth, you could say it's because it's not too far away from the Earth to be seen. The speed of a comet changes during its orbit. Describe the shape of its orbit and explain how and why the speed changes during the orbit. You may use a diagram for your answer. So, first mark saying the shape is elliptical. So you must use that word elliptical. You can't say oval, you can't say spherical, you must say elliptical. And then the second mark is saying it speeds up when it approaches the Sun, and that's because the gravity is greater. So it speeds up when it approaches the Sun because the gravity is greater. Now, if you don't know this word elliptical, then actually just a drawing of an ellipse would be fine, like that, with a dot in the middle to show where it's orbiting. But then the other 2 marks saying that speeds up when it approaches the Sun, 1 mark, because of gravity is greater, 2nd mark. Asteroids also orbit the Sun. Some asteroids pass close to Earth. These are called near-Earth objects. Explain why it's difficult for scientists to observe these near-Earth objects. Because they're relatively small, or they're far away, and they reflect little light, or they do not emit light at all. So first mark saying they're far away or they're small, 2nd mark saying they don't make any light for themselves. Next question. One day, scientists may discover an asteroid on a collision course with the Earth. One method to protect the Earth would be to use a long-range missile which explodes at the asteroid. Explain the advantages and disadvantages of using this method to protect the Earth. So you've got to have at least 2 advantages or at least 2 disadvantages to get these marks. You have to have at least 1 of each to get all the marks. So any 2 of these would be fine. You could say advantages, it destroys the asteroid or breaks into small fragments. You could say that it, as it is very distant, if the first attempt misses the asteroid, there'll be time for a second attempt. Or you could say, as it's very distant, a small deflection can miss the Earth, but make it still miss the Earth. And then disadvantages, any 2 of these would be fine. It may miss the asteroid. You could say it could cause more fragments to hit the Earth, or it could cause smaller, more unpredictable parts. Or you could say if the asteroid is large, it's unlikely to have an effect or deflect the path enough. Or you could say it could deflect it towards the Earth if it wasn't on the course to begin with. This next question is your 6-mark question in the physics section, so please mark this yourself using the mark scheme on the Google site, and then ask your teacher to check whether you've got it correct or not, if you're unsure. Then finally, electrical power can be generated in many ways. Look at the data on different types of power generation. Coal, oil, gas and nuclear are all types of thermal power station. Why are all these called thermal power stations? And that's because that they are all generate heat. So the water's heated, or the steam is produced, or the fuel releases heat, any one of those. Then the thermal power stations are more efficient than wind turbine farms, which is why wind turbine farms are often preferred to thermal power stations. That's because any one of these, again, it's renewable energy, there's less polluting gases, or that fossil fuels are finite. So that fossil fuels are running out. And then the coal power station has an input of 500 megawatts. Using information in the table, calculate the energy in megajoules wasted each minute in this power station. So 3 marks here. So the first mark is working out the useful power output. So you can see the coal power station has efficiency of 34%. So you've got to work out what 34% of 500 is first. So it's 500 times 0.34, and that equals 330. megawatts. And then to work out the energy in joules, you essentially do power times time. So that's 330 times a power in seconds. So each minute is 60 seconds. So that equals 19,800 megajoules. That's a pretty tricky question. So if you did 66%, if you worked out the 330, then that gets you 2 marks. And then the last thing is the 19,800. That gets you the 3rd mark. So 330 is working out the useful energy output using the efficiency of the coal-fired power station, which is 0.34. And the 2nd marks are working out the energy that creates, which is power times time. So add up your marks, add it to your poster, and that was the final one. So now go back over all your papers and just see where you need to brush up on topics, and then you should be ready for the exam.